Why don't you trust people and you feel all alone and you're like the outsider looking in and you don't belong? This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. Today, I'm going to talk to you about why you don't trust people. Because if you're sick and tired of feeling like you don't belong and you're the outsider looking in, it's because you don't trust people. And when you don't trust people, you're going to push people away. Good people, potentially beneficial people, benevolent people, people that could give you opportunity. People that can bring laughter and joy into your life. People that you can potentially have a friendship with or be a partner, an ally with. And when you push them away and constantly push people away, you begin to feel isolated and it becomes depressing because there's nobody to talk to. There's nobody to bounce ideas off of. There's nobody to resonate emotions with. There's nobody to share any kind of love with. And when that happens, it's depressing. You've got nobody to turn to, no one to watch your back, no one to look out for you, because you don't establish connection with anybody, even though deep down inside you do. This hypervigilance, this suspicion, this constant suspicion of people comes from trauma. Usually it's from PTSD or CPTSD. Now, I'll share with you a story because I was tortured when I was 4 and 5. And my parents, nobody believed me when I looked for or asked for help. So I developed a sense of distrust and almost a lack of respect for authority figures, for parents and teachers. If they're not going to be on my side, then who is? I've got to be reliant upon myself. So I became very guarded. I played a lot of mind games to test people's integrity, to test if they are speaking the truth or not, if they mean what they say. And I could read people and I'd mess with them because I knew when people were not being sincere. Now in grade school, that made me popular because I was the rebel without a cause. I mouthed off to people, stood up for myself, backtalked to teachers, and was sort of a class clown with that. I was a wise ass. Had no respect for the principal, unless the teacher demonstrated a real loving presence. I could tell whether a teacher was actually caring, whether they cared for students or not. And the ones I didn't, I just didn't respect. I did the work, I got A's and whatnot, so they had to respect me because I fulfilled the academic requirements, but inside, I even pushed friends away. I remember in 5th grade, Adam and Jason Gakin invited me over to their house to play. And I went over and they had so much joy and so much enthusiasm. I was like, this is new. I've never experienced this with anybody. And I became afraid. I became suspicious. And they called me and said, how come you don't want to come over anymore? And I said, because the happiness that you have, the joy that you have doesn't seem real to me. How can anybody be that happy and joyous? It tells me that you must want something from me, and I don't feel safe. Now that was my delusion at 10 years old. I thought happiness and joy was some sort of rouge. You see the delusion that takes place, the misperception that trauma can cause. And this hypervigilance that I carried through into my adult life. I created elaborate tests to test people's will and integrity. Even as I got older, not until I studied PTSD and CPTSD and trauma and the impact that it has upon our brain, Because CPTSD, which means complex post-traumatic stress disorder, when you have multiple incidences of trauma, it changes the brain. It causes this chronic hypervigilance because the brain will replay the traumatic event over and over and over. And the way the brain forms, the cortex, specifically the prefrontal cortex behind the forehead, loses its ability to execute executive function, decision making. And it stops regulating your emotions, the limbic brain. So the limbic brain becomes dysregulated. The memory, the parahippocampus of the brain, that's the memory of people and events, and the right visual cortex get enlarged. And they're constantly active because the memory, the visual memory of the trauma gets replayed over and over and over because the brain is hardwired to protect yourself. And it creates this sense of hypervigilance. The prefrontal cortex shrinks. You lose executive function, can't comprehend clearly, can't make clear decisions, and therefore can't read social cues. And that's where the distrust comes in. When you can't read proper social cues, in fact, when healthy social cues, like myself, when these two kids invited me over and they demonstrated nothing but happiness and love, I misinterpreted it as threatening. This is what happens to the brain. I know what it's like to walk around distrusting people. It created for me such a sense of isolation. I didn't know who I can turn to, who I can talk to, who has my back, who's on my side, who loves me, who includes me into their community. And those of you with CPTSD know this because when you go to a family event, it's scary. It's triggering, especially if one of the family members abused you, beat you, or whatever happened. None of my families abused me. These were my teachers in nursery school and kindergarten. That's why I had no respect for teachers. Unless the teacher demonstrated an overwhelming sense of love and joy and benevolence towards us, I always suspected they're just there for a paycheck. Now, I don't know their lives. That's the way I lived. And I know this from experience. The isolation, the loneliness, the depression that sets in over time. In fact, men experience this and women experience this in marriage. You feel like your spouse doesn't get you, doesn't support you. It's really isolating. And it's scary to realize, well, I'm married to this person and they don't even understand me. They don't know me. Oh my God. Or I'm working with these people all this time, the same office, and we don't really know each other. I don't know who's going to try to sabotage me. Who has my back? Who's looking out for me? Who can I look out for that would respect what I do for them and reciprocate? Because we all know in the office place, it can turn into high school real quick. Who's popular? Who's not? Who's the nerd? Who's the jock? Who's the schmoozer? Who's the quiet one but cool? Who's the reliable one? You have all these social roles, and that can create anxiety when you have trauma because your sense of boundary is distorted. Your sense of self gets distorted with other people because when you have this hypervigilance, it interferes with your ability to perceive what is happening and therefore read social cues in a healthy manner and therefore respond to them. Because the sense of hypervigilance is like being frozen. You're emotionally shut down. And neurologically speaking, you actually become disconnected from the cortex, higher cortical functioning, comprehending and decision-making and executing actions based upon clear understanding. Because when you're in a flight, fight, freeze, or fawn response, you get tunnel vision. And that tunnel vision only allows you to see what you want to see. Think of it this way. Grab a toilet paper roll and look through it. Then go grab a big box Open it up on both ends so all you have is this rectangular or cube space to look through, and compare the two. Would you rather look through the toilet paper tube or look through that box? You'll see one version is just like this, while the other version, it's out here. So you have a bigger perspective. When you're in a state of hypervigilance and distrustful, you're assuming that people are dangerous. And when you assume people are dangerous, you're going to push them out of your life. People that can give you opportunity, people that can be a great friend, people that can be an ally. When this happens, this sense of distrust creates an isolation and then eventually depression. When you don't know who you can talk to, who you can turn to, who's on your side, who you can trust, there's a certain terror, there's a certain agony that sets in. There's a real felt anxiety. And that anxiety is caused by distrust. Because deep down inside, we human beings have a desire to be loved, to belong, to be a part of, to be included. And often, that desire to belong, we actually suppress it with this hypervigilance. Because of the distrust, because of the trauma, at some point in life, somebody hurt you. Somebody hurt you bad. And that betrayal, that pain, reminds you, and you project it onto people because the brain is hardwired to protect yourself. You don't want to go through that again. Completely understandable. Nobody wants to feel betrayed, have a knife stabbed in their back, be abused. That's not something we aspire for. Nobody aspires for that. We aspire for love. We aspire for respect. We aspire for acknowledgement. We aspire for happiness and joy. When you have an extreme sense of distrust, it will rot away your life all the way to the point of never truly feeling like you belong, like you're the outsider looking in. And that sense of belonging may turn into perfectionism because you're seeking approval. And perhaps, like myself, my parents, people around me, seemed to want me around when I performed well, got good grades. I grew up skateboarding. I was a big fish in a little pond. I know what it's like to be admired and be popular. Yet nobody, or feel like nobody, was looking out for me, even though they were. I was unable to see it. I lost a lot of friends because of this. I know I'm speaking from my own experience here. I pushed people away. This is something that is happening, and that's why you feel like you don't belong. That sense of distrust creates a guard. It creates a wall where you don't let anybody in because it's scary to be vulnerable, because you don't want to get hurt again. That pain inside, the brain has to process it. And it's hard to process this sense of sadness, this sense of anger, this resentment, this sense of fear, all at the same time. It overwhelms the brain, so the cortex shuts down. And it creates a frozen response, which makes it very difficult to respond appropriately to social cues. And it creates a sense of social awkwardness that you begin to avoid all social interaction and become a loner. That's what happens. So the way out of this is to build your sense of confidence. the need to feel comfortable that we overlay on our need to feel safe. We often associate our sense of safety with a sense of comfort. Because when you're with friends whom you trust, friends whom you have a great time with, when you have that moment when you're all sitting around laughing and sharing stories, there's a sense of relaxation. You're reading social cues, you're responding to them well. There is a give and take, there is a sharing of joy and laughter. There's a sharing of honesty and authenticity. And when you feel safe, there's like an aha moment. And you remember those times, and those are the people you call your good friends. Because the oxytocin gets released. And the oxytocin is the love hormone. And when that gets released, the higher cortical function can set in. Your brain, it's regulating your emotions, your emotional responses. You're able to read social cues, and you can respond appropriately, and there is a genuine, authentic relationship. Then you feel like you belong and you're a part of. And when you're in a state of distrust all the time, it makes those experiences very difficult to have, because you'll push people away all the way to the point of becoming a loner, isolating yourself, and not experiencing love. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I am a certified life coach, because if this is happening to you, it's going to impact your relationship with your family, your friends, and your community. And if you want to advance in your career, you want to advance in your intimacy with your relationships, I can help you with that, because I've gone through it myself and I know how to overcome it. Go ahead and leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening.